How do you write the last chapter of your own story? I mean, really, when you're faced with something huge, something overwhelming, how do you decide what you leave behind? Well, we're going to look at how a few very different people from totally different eras answered that exact question. Now, this isn't what you think it is. No, it's not the start of a church service. This is the beginning of a final, super urgent message from one of the most controversial figures in music history. It's this raw, totally unexpected plea from someone who knew their time was just about up.
And that voice, it belongs to Eric Wright, but you probably know him as Eazy-E, the godfather of gangster rap. And he wasn't saying this on a stage or in a studio. He was in a hospital bed, facing what he called the biggest fight of his life.
So, shortly after being diagnosed with AIDS, Eazy-E put out this statement to his fans. He knew all the rumors were flying around, and he just decided, you know what? I'm going to grab the reins on this. I'm telling my own story. He framed his diagnosis not as some kind of sad ending, but as one last critical battle. The thing that's so striking here is just how brutally honest he is. He doesn't back away from his past at all. The street life, all the women, the wild times. But then he just flips the script. He takes total responsibility. And with his final public act, he tries to save his fans from making the same mistakes, turning his own personal tragedy into this very public warning. Eazy-E's choice really makes you think, doesn't it? When your back is against the wall, what do? Do you fight back with force? Do you fight with your words? Or do you just fight with the cold, hard truth? And this struggle to define your own legacy, it's not new. It's a fight that's been going on for centuries, often under the absolute worst conditions you can imagine. Yeah, this fight to define yourself against impossible odds, it is an ancient struggle. So let's just rewind the clock a bit. We're going to go from a hospital room in the 90s way back to the ancient world, where for some people, the fight for a legacy was a literal, bloody fight for your life. Okay, so this is Spartacus. He was a Thracian, sold into slavery, and then forced to be a gladiator. But he decided his story wasn't going to end in some arena for sport. He chose to define his legacy by leading a rebellion that literally shook the Roman Republic to its core. And you have to understand, the scale of this was just staggering. This wasn't some small riot. Spartacus built an army of 90,000 people. They got the most powerful empire on earth to its knees. For a man who was legally considered property, violence wasn't just a strategy. It was the only language his captors would understand. He chose to fight with fire and steel. But the price for that choice, for that physical rebellion, was absolutely devastating. After Rome finally crushed the revolt, 6,000 of Spartacus's followers were crucified all along the Appian Way. It was a horrific, very public message. This is what happens when you fight the system with force. All right, now let's fast forward almost 2,000 years to a different continent where the same brutal fight for freedom was happening. This image, with the plea, "Am I not a man and a brother?" became a powerful symbol for the abolitionist movement, a movement that saw its own share of violent rebellions. And that brings us to Nat Turner. He was a preacher, and he believed God had chosen him to end slavery. And his method, just like Spartacus, was armed rebellion. He led an uprising that spread absolute terror through Virginia and resulted in the deaths of at least 55 white people. And again, just like with Spartacus, the punishment was swift and just horrific. Turner was executed, but in the chaos that followed, white mobs murdered hundreds of innocent black people, and state governments passed even harsher laws. The response wasn't just punishment, it was a message. It was meant to crush not just that one rebellion, but the very idea of another one ever happening. So fighting with force, it came with an immense and often devastating risk. But what if there's another way? What if your weapon isn't a sword, but a sentence? What if you don't fight on a battlefield, but on the printed page? This brings us to a whole different kind of rebellion, one fought with intellect and language. This is Frederick Douglass. Now, he was also born into slavery, but he never led a violent uprising. Instead, he chose a different weapon. His weapon was his mind. His fight for freedom was a fight for literacy. And look at how he did it. It's like each step made the next one possible. In a system that depended on keeping people in ignorance, just learning to read was a revolutionary act. Seriously, that was the key that unlocked everything else. It let him create forged papers to escape. It gave him the power to describe his experiences with incredible clarity. And eventually, it made him one of the most powerful voices against slavery in the entire world. And you know what? This strategy is ancient. This is Aesop. He lived around 600 BC. He was a slave, but today we all know his name, while the names of the masters who owned him are completely lost to history. And his weapon? Simple stories.
I mean, think about that for a second. His ideas, his fables, were so powerful, they didn't even need to be written down to survive for centuries. They were just passed along through conversations at parties, from one generation to the next, for thousands of years. That is a legacy that outlasts empires.
So you can really see the two paths laid out here, right? On one side, you've got rebellion by force. It's fiery, it's symbolic, but often it's tragic. And on the other side, you've got rebellion by word. This is about creating ideas that can change the world, maybe more slowly, but permanently. Two totally different weapons, two totally different kinds of legacies. Which brings us right back to where we started, back to that hospital room in Compton in 1995, back to Eazy-E. Now, he wasn't leading an army and he wasn't writing fables. So, how did he choose to shape his final story? Well, Eazy-E chose a third path. His final act of rebellion wasn't with a weapon, and it wasn't with a pen. It was with brutal, unfiltered truth. He took his own reality, a life of excess that led to a fatal disease, and he turned it into a lesson for everyone else, a final sermon from the most unlikely preacher. With those final words, he basically passed the torch. He handed the responsibility over. He wasn't telling a fable like Aesop or calling for an uprising like Spartacus. He was looking right at his fans, his community, and saying, hey, your choices matter. This is real. He left behind a legacy of accountability. And that really leaves all of us with a question. Whether it's through force or words or just plain truth, everybody leaves a story behind. Spartacus fought for his. Douglas wrote for his. Eazy-E told a hard truth for his. So when it's all said and done, what's your story going to be?